What's up, guys? In tonight's stream, I'm going to share some of the wildest experiences probably that I've had in my entire life, and also some of the most compelling in terms of proof, I guess, being presented in this type of experience. I try to be really critical, and I've always been very skeptical. You know, I'm not a huge believer generally in psychics. I do know that it happens because I've experienced it too many times to write it off. But it's also true that it seems like almost 100% of the time, mediums and clairvoyants are fake, you know? But I think these stories are really convincing, except that I can actually offer an explanation as to how I would have been able to get the information that I was able to get without having to actually converse with any spirits. Although it's possible, you know, I have to admit, and you'll see what I mean. And I'm going to start with the least of these stories first and then work my way up to the craziest ones. So please do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron and supporting our efforts at preserving ancient knowledge and discovering new knowledge. And also join me for a music stream afterwards. I've been working on new music, and I'm pretty happy about how it's going so far. So don't forget to check that out. And so, okay, during these experiences all happened during a pretty brief window in my life. And I had an awful lot of really strange, maybe parapsychological or preternatural experiences during this time period. And there was a sort of conceptual continuity that was woven through it all, which made it that much more significant. You know, it's not like there were just these like crazy synchronicities and precognitions and whatnot. There was a theme that was omnipresent, that was woven through all of it. And so we'll start with the first story. We'll just jump right into it. We'll call her Marissa rather than using her actual name. And this was a person that was present during that period in my life. And we didn't know each other well. We didn't spend a lot of time together. But we had simultaneous experiences and stuff that were really, really insane. For example, I'll give you just one example. One night I was sleeping and I was sort of woken up by this blue light that surrounded me, and it was basically one of those. What do they call it when you get lifted up off your bed and you sleep paralysis or sleep paralysis demons, right? I've always perceived it as like an entity has got me by the feet and is swinging me around, and I can't move. I can't do anything to fight. It was like that, only for the first time and only time in my entire life, I was enveloped in this blue crackling web of energy while it was happening. And for some reason, while I'm being spun around the room, I look at my clock and I see it's 5:30 a.m. on the dot. So 8:30 in the morning, my phone rings and it's Marissa. And she goes, "What the happened at 5:30 in the morning last night?" And I was just silent because I didn't want to put it out there because I wanted to be sure. And she says, this blue light like lifted me 4 feet off my bed and spun me around. And I was like, wow, that's really insane. And so this kind of stuff happened to us quite a few times. You know, like I said, even though we didn't really know each other well, we didn't talk a lot, we would have these like simultaneous psychic experiences together. And so one day after we got to know each other a little better, she told me that she had a sister who had committed suicide at the age of, well, when she was 12. I don't know how old the sister was, maybe 20 or something. And about a week later, I can't honestly remember if I was dreaming or meditating and I think I was probably laying in bed in that space between sleep and waking. That seems the most likely. And I had this experience that the sister of Marissa's came to me and said, "I didn't kill myself. That's not what happened." And no more information than that. But the next time I saw Marissa, I said, "You know, I don't think that your sister killed herself. I feel like she was actually murdered." And Marissa said, "Well, yeah, actually, the police and my parents and everybody pretty much thinks that she was actually killed by this really jealous, overbearing boyfriend. She was hung by her stockings, and it was just really weird. It didn't seem like a normal sort of suicide." And so that one is interesting, but it's really the least compelling of the three stories. But definitely, you know, was the first time this happened and worthy of note. But the second one is way, way, way wilder. And by the way, after the 3 stories where I apparently channeled dead people, I'm going to tell one story about the skeleton man spirit, which was an encounter that I had. I never actually encountered the spirit myself, but you'll see. It's a wild story. And there were a whole bunch of witnesses. In fact, I made a video about it, and if you look in the comments, people commented that were part of the story. So if you guys follow me, there's an old Mexican gangbanger named Joe, and that's his name. And I slipped and used it before, so I'm just going to go ahead and say Joe. And he was a bandito, which is like the biker gang wing of the cartel, basically. So really scary, the kind of dude that would probably play soccer with human heads back in the day and whatnot. But he was old, and he was missing most of his teeth, and I just knew him as this like little old man that I didn't really think of him like that, which apparently almost cost me my life, as I would find out. But so one day I went over there at the direction of the head of a fraternity that I was involved with at the time, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Stellar Matutina lineage. And Robert, the head of the order, that's also his real name, sent me over there. Well, he didn't send me over there. He just told me to go use a computer. That's how I ended up in this situation, I guess. And when I brought up the website that he had directed me to, Joe's eyes bug out of his head, and he's like, "That's my effing brother," And I'm like, "What? That's McGregor Mathers." And he's like, No. That's my brother that got killed, I say. And I'm like, I don't understand. And I'm on the phone with Robert, and I'm like, "What am I supposed to do? You're trying to tell me to fill something out or pay some money?" He's like, No. What's going on around you? Why don't you deal with what's going on around you? And I was like, okay, I think I get it. And it just dawned on me like the assignment from the universe, and I'm not saying Robert knew exactly what was happening. When people intuit this kind of stuff, in my experience, you don't need to have direct instructions. You just kind of know what to say, That's my assumption. I don't really know. I never asked him what he had actually intended by sending me to this computer. But that's what I'm assuming, But at any rate, I felt like I got the message. So I asked Joe to come out into his living room with me. And I had never done this kind of thing deliberately before, but I knew I needed to get his attention somehow and to prove that there was good reason to listen to me. And it was my job to get him to forgive the guy that killed his brother. Because, as I would soon discover, the guy that had killed his brother was actually already killed by someone else. And so Joe had been eaten alive for decades by this like desire for vengeance to go and murder this dude that murdered his brother, but he couldn't kill him because he was already dead. You can't, try to stand up right now, you guys. Now stand up again. You know what I mean? It's like that. You just can't murder the murdered. So I sit down and I ask Joe if I can have just one hit of weed. And as soon as I took the hit of weed, everything in my internal space turned dark purple, which for some reason I associated that color with channeling. Like I knew that color was the correct color somehow. And so I said, "Who was Charlito?" And he's like, "It's my brother's dog. It was my brother's dog at the time that he got shot." And mind you guys, what's so convincing about this is I didn't fish. I wasn't like, does the name Chucky, Charlie, or Cincinnati, you know what I mean? Like the guys on TV, they're always like, I'm getting a C, and there might be also an A, and you know what I mean? It wasn't like that. I was like, who's Charlito? My brother's dog. Who is Christina? That's the bitch that got him shot. Who is, this other guy? And I don't remember the guy's name, but it was like a weird Mexican name that I didn't even know. You know what I mean? It wasn't like Juan or Miguel or something. It was like some weird name that I've never heard in my life. And he's like, "That's the dude that shot him," and he's like, "What is going on right now?" And I thought he was freaked out because I knew all this stuff. But I would later discover that he was considering going in the room and getting a shotgun and blowing my head off because he thought I was possessed by demons. And we'll get to how I found that out later. But I went through this long process with him, once I really had his attention, like trying to convince him, like, "Dude, this is eating you alive. Look at all this OxyContin you're taking all the time. Like all this hatred, man, you're just seething every day, and it went on for hours and hours and hours. And then this might be the most supernatural thing that happened, although it could have just been some giant insect. I don't know for sure. There's no way of knowing really what, but as soon as he finally relented and said, "You're right, I have to forgive the guy that killed my brother," this giant thing flew out from the lampshade, and it looked kind of like a mosquito hawk, but it was way too big. And we were in the mountains of Colorado. It's not like we were in the jungle where there would just be some giant shit in the lamp and it would make sense, you know? No, it was huge. And Joe's eyes bugged out bigger than they had at any point during this whole channeling episode, the whole thing. Like, that freaked him out, as it did me, more than anything else, because it was just so unnatural and weird. And I saw him go to kill it, and I'm like, slow motion, like, no, and it flew out the window. And so that's basically the gist of that story. But then I came back over to Joe's house a couple days later, and his son was on the stairs in tears, and he's like, "You got to get out of here, dude." And I was like, "Why?" He's like, "You don't understand who my dad is. He was going to shoot you in the head, man. He's Catholic. He was a bandito. You come over." He's like, "Man, Harley came over here. Fucking, he knew the name of Charlito and Christina and all of the, you know what I mean? And all of this stuff." He's like, "Dude is possessed by demons, man. I almost blew his head off." And I was like, "Oh my God," you know, I had no idea that. And he's like, "Just go, just don't come back for a few days. Let him get over it," you know? So, okay, so that's story number 2. This one is the craziest, though, by far. And my entire life, I've had this voice that I've always just kind of associated with, like, the subconscious or something. I've never really known what to make of it. It's also probably one of the biggest disappointments of my entire life, that I haven't been able to comply with it, even after it's demonstrated preternatural access to information over and over and over again. You know, even as far back as high school, before I had ever read Crowley or any of this talk of higher self or true will or any of this stuff, you know, I would mention to people sometimes, you know, that voice that you have that always knows exactly what you're supposed to do, and it's really just a matter of whether you listen to it or not, you know? So it's always been there, and it's just kind of been a crapshoot whether I listen to it. And if you want more insight into why that is, I've talked about it plenty in my videos, but it basically all comes down to trauma and damage and self-sabotage, all that sort of thing. It took me a long time to understand that, but it didn't matter how many times it proved itself. Until I resolved all that other stuff, there was no way that I would comply enough for it to be meaningful. But at any rate, during the Phoenix process period of my life, that voice was very loud and clear and ever present. And it proved itself many, many times. And so at one point during this process, I was just sitting around at home, and I heard that voice in my head say, "Call your mom and ask her about Michael James." And my full name is Harley James Michael Donnelly, now that I'm totally doxxed, but that's my full name. And the reason that I got that name is because apparently my parents were arguing, and the doctor just wrote all the names down. Instead of just waiting for them to sort it out, he just wrote all the names down. So I have 4 names. And this guy was like my mom's soulmate, I guess, when they were kids. I think they were like 16 or something like that, or maybe even younger, because I was born when my mom was 15, I think. Or wait, no, my dad was 15, my mom was 17. The guy that chased my dad away was 19. So I don't know. It had to have been a little bit before. So 16 or so, right? Yeah, the Jerry Springer episode right there. So the reason that my dad, or my little brother's dad, really wasn't really my dad, but the guy that was present at the hospital arguing with my mom, that played dad for a few years, he wanted me to be named Harley. And my mom wanted me to be named Michael James after her friend that killed herself, but the dude was jealous, and he's like, no, you're not naming him that. And that's why the doctor just got sick of it and wrote all the names down. So I'd always accepted my mom's story that he died on a motorcycle, that he had a motorcycle accident. And one day that voice comes in my head, and it says, "Call your mom and ask her what really happened to Michael James." They reversed the James and the Michael, by the way, in my name. But call your mom and ask her what really happened. So I call my mom up, and I'm like, what really happened with Michael James? And there's just silence. And she's like, "Why are you asking me this?" And I'm like, "Because you lied to me, and I need to know the truth." And she said, "Okay, well, he huffed himself to death while drunk out on a golf course." And wait till you guys hear the synchronicity after the story, though. This is weird. So she tells me this, he huffed himself to death while drunk and that voice says, ask her what Steve Miller had to do with it. And I'm like, what? Because I'm thinking like the rock star, you know? And so I said, what does Steve Miller have to do with this? And my mom's just dead silent on the line, like, and she goes, Harley, you're scaring me. You're like a TV psychic or something. I'm like, no. This is real. No TV about it. And she's like, that's the guy that he caught his girlfriend with that drove him to commit suicide out there on the golf course. And so that brings a couple of pretty serious questions to mind. The first one being, how in the hell did I know that? If I wasn't actually talking to some kind of spirit or demon or, you know, like what was telling me what to say? How did it know? You know, what is that thing, first of all? Second of all, how did I get this information? And I always try to look for alternative explanations. You know, obviously I legitimately knew, right? I don't think there's any question about that. You know, to say it's all a coincidence just sounds stupid to me. So, how did that happen? I think the reality probably is that all of the information that I got from my mom, or from Joe or Marissa was known to them. So I think it's just as likely that there's like a subconscious feedback loop that exists between people that allows you to receive information. I don't think it's necessarily true that you are actually channeling this from literal dead people. Yeah, and that's another thing. With my mom, because it was my mother, they say that you can inherit memories. So, you know, obviously I wasn't related to Joe. I wasn't related to Marissa. Marissa's story could have easily just been a guess, you know, so. But Joe's, I mean, I knew the name of the dog, the guy that committed the murder, the girl the go-between that got him shot and all that stuff. But those were all things that were known to him, right? So, you know, my mom, though, I could have easily, that's true. I have the genetic memory, the genetic connection. But here's another couple of interesting ideas. And this is something that occurred to me many years ago when studying the Kabbalah. There's this idea in the Klipot, which is like the inverse of the tree of life, right? Everything in the universe is balanced by an opposite. So the Kabbalistic tree of life has a negative tree of life that balances it. In fact, there are 8. And the 8 turned on its side as the infinity symbol, right? So it makes sense that there would be, you know, there's the 4 layers of the soul that correspond to the 4 different Kabbalistic trees, and then each of those 4 trees has a corresponding negative klipotic tree of life, right? And so there's this idea of the shells of the dead, which are klipotic spirits or demons. And we generally have a negative interpretation of that, but it's not necessarily true that they're like evil. It's just that they are an inverse correlation with the positive forces in the universe. But either way, the idea that came to me is that, you know, another way to think about it is that there is no information lost at the subatomic level, but information is lost at the level of thermodynamics, right? So in one sense, the soul remains. In another sense, the soul does not remain. And so what does that mean? It means that there is sort of an information residue that remains in the field of information in the universe. And the way that I sort of understood interactions with ayahuasca spirits, before I had this conversation with the Shipibo shamana about a month and a half ago, I had kind of had the idea that when you're interacting with these manifestations of lost loved ones and whatnot on ayahuasca, something's not quite right. And it felt like they were actually a combination of the residual memory that the universe has of the person and your own memories, like making up a simulation. And incredibly, when I asked this shamana if it was possible to communicate with the dead using ayahuasca, that was her answer. Exactly the same thing that I had formulated based on my it wasn't really based on the shells of the dead idea from the Kabbalah, but that's what sort of catalyzed this thinking, and also if you think about this, like most of the people that believe in channeling also believe in reincarnation. Can't be both, either or any kind of afterlife. If the soul has moved on, then, how are you channeling? They're not even the same person anymore. They've moved on. Maybe they're a bison now or something. I mean, you know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense that you can channel people that are reincarnated because they're not that person anymore. Unless what you're actually communicating with is a shell of the dead, a sort of avatar that is really just information that has been preserved by the universe, because that's part of the, part of how the universe works. So that idea is really interesting to me, and you can test it too, because when you encounter these things, you'll generally see that there are limits to the kind of information that you can actually get. So yeah, that's really the only two explanations that I can come up with that seem to work, because if people have passed on, it doesn't make sense that you would continue to have access to them indefinitely. But, like I said, the information that I was able to obtain in all of those cases was absolutely correct. There was no fishing around, no mumbo, I just knew exactly what I was supposed to say. And in one case, it was narrated by a sort of voice, So those are the two stories and the explanations that I can offer potentially for them. So now I'm going to share the Skeleton Man story, which I've already made a video about a long time ago, but I've been getting a lot of questions lately about spirits, and it seems like there's a lot of interest in that, and the jury is still out in my mind as to whether these things like objectively exist or not, but this story makes it really difficult to sort of dismiss. All right, so the story of the Skeleton Man, it requires a little bit of backstory. So there's this belief that the Grateful Dead had about their improvisations, that there was something that they called it, that they always spelled with a capital I, and they basically said that it would, they couldn't make it happen, and that they didn't really know what it was. It was some sort of collective consciousness or something that they would sometimes access, and when that happened, their music would emit a sort of energy that would sort of change the consciousness of people that were in range of it, basically. It's a really simple explanation. But, so the goal as a musician inspired by that style, I guess, is to go out and do the same thing, right? To elevate consciousness using vibration. I mean, this is the formula of any magician that's ever lived that actually knows what they're doing. And so I had a few confirmations from people in the audience that sort of thing was occurring when I would go out and play with various bands and stuff. But I had a lot of doubt about it. I didn't know if I really believed it, and I didn't really think that I could be worthy of such a thing. So I was living in a little cabin out in the Redwoods in Northern California during this time period, and I was kind of sitting around at home having an existential crisis, thinking, could I really be an avatar for this thing that the Grateful Dead were puppets for? Like, just seems ridiculous. And my phone rings, right? That's the timing of it. It passed through my head, my phone rings, almost as if like the thought like passed through and then hit my phone on its way out the door or something. And I answer the phone, and I had placed an ad in Craigslist just looking for normal pot work, but in Northern California back then it was still illegal. So it wasn't in my name. By the way, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider supporting us on Patreon, and also there are options in the chat to support us with one-time donations. We are demonetized, so we really appreciate your support. And so I'm thinking, could I really be an avatar for this thing? Phone beeps, Craigslist work, fake name though. So he couldn't have known that I was this guitarist that, was associated with that style of music. And he said, can I meet you down at the gas station to talk about something? And I was like, yeah, Yeah, sure, so because you don't talk about it on the phone, a lot of people didn't want to give their addresses and give away where their grow was. You don't know who you're talking to, and you definitely want to meet people before you just give any details. So I go down there, and there's like this giant dreadlock hippie leaning on one of those electric cars, on the Tesla, and that's what I expected, But he says, this is going to sound kind of weird. And if you've ever seen the movie Sling Blade, he talked just like Sling Blade. So it was more like, this is going to sound a little bit weird. It was super crazy. And he said, are you aware the Grateful Dead was more of a force than they were a band? And I was like, yeah, man, I get the Dead. Yeah. And he's like, well, there's this 10-foot tall skeleton that smokes a corncob pipe that you can only see when you take a 10 strip of acid. My wife and I call him Mr. Mojo. And I'm like, your wife and you both call him that? And of course at this point I'm thinking, okay, giant hippie, 10 strip of acid, kind of ready to blow it off. And then he's like, when I saw your name in the ad, he told me to call you and tell you that ever since Garcia died, the thing that had been puppeting them has been roaming the earth looking for a new avatar. And I was like, then he had my attention, because that's exactly what I was thinking about. Not so much in the sense of like being a replacement, but just to be, could I connect with that thing and do the same thing? And he starts going on about how, I needed to keep my public image more clean. And I remember a week later I was playing at a campground, and I had a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a cigarette in the other hand. And I looked out and I saw this group of kids staring at me like I was Slash or something, and I just it was just awful, I never did that again. And the fact that this guy had just said that to me like a week before really, it was like I could hear his Sling Blade accent in my head. But he tells me, the band is going to have a 9-month incubation period, just like an actual human. And then after that 9-month period, you will know for certain that you have actually connected with the Grateful Dead's inner circle. And that also requires some back circle, because when I was 21 years old, I left the East Coast telling everyone basically, consciousness has a role that it plays in creating our experience. And so I'm going to go out to California and play, if not with the actual members of the Dead, but with the Grateful Dead Inner Circle. And before it was done, I had in fact played with Dark Star Orchestra and Rob Baracco, who played in the Dead after Garcia died, and also Jay Lane, who is playing in Dead and Company now. So I did do that. I did do exactly what I said I was going to do when I left the East Coast. But so he tells us, the 9 months, the incubation period will be over, and you will know that this is all real because of who you will find yourself surrounded by. And so I was like, okay, whatever, dude, and I get in my car and I drive home, and I'm definitely struck by how weird it was that I was sitting at home thinking about this. But I've been doing this long enough to know that things like that, no matter how synchronistic they are, aren't always meaningful. There's a universal mind, and there are higher orders of symmetry, and it's a very complex universe. When people say that couldn't be a coincidence, it just means they don't understand that there is so much information that you are in a sea of all the time, that for a few of those things to align in absurdly meaningful ways is a statistical inevitability. It's not really that weird. It's just certain. It's like a mathematical certainty that that's going to be part of the experience. You know what I mean? So I'm thinking that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And I go home, and I get in an argument with my girlfriend, and I'm like, no, I'm done with her, and which was good. She was narcissistic personality disorder. She still stalks me 7 years later on YouTube sometimes. She was legitimately insane. And mental illness is progressive, so it got worse and worse as I was anyways. So I move out to go live with this drummer, and we're going to grow pot together, and he's a drummer, So one night we're on acid, and he hands me his phone, and there's this guy just murdering a bass. And I was like, who is that? And he says, well, that's, Brian. It's Brian. I've known him since we were kids, and he'll come and play with us. And I was like, there's no way. There's no way this dude is going to come and play with us. Like, why would he do that? He lives in the Bay Area. He's obviously some kind of prodigy monster. Like, where, what are we? And so that guy, Brian, drove his Mercedes into a river the next day and couldn't get to work anymore, so he couldn't pay rent in the Bay Area. So within like 2 or 3 days after Ivan shows me this video of him and says, oh yeah, he'll come play with us, Brian's living with us. And so I'm like, okay. I just ran into this like guy talking about this Mr. Mojo skeleton creature, who, by the way, is a legend in the Hopi, sort of something akin to, who's that? There's an African god that meets at crossroads. It has horns, and it's magic and music, just like Thoth, Hermes, who also is often depicted with horns and is met at crossroads, and god of magic and music. Like, it's a theme, but in the Hopi legend in North America, it's always a skeleton. And I've seen this before, where I was at a show one time and I was looking at the clouds, and it looked like a drawing, a pencil sketch of a skeleton like reclining in the cloud, and this guy walks up to me without even looking up. He goes, yeah, he's been here all night, and he just keeps going, So stuff like that is kind of, this skeleton is known, you talk to deadheads and stuff, and they all have these weird stories about it. So anyways, so we have the people now. It's only been a week since I met this weird hippie that said this shit to me. And so we have the people, but we don't have any equipment. We have no PA. We don't have any speakers. We have no microphones. So we're sitting on a porch like 2 or 3 days later, and this crazy murderous pot grower from over on the hill called Mountain Man comes, like, redneck murderer. I mean, the guy would like shoot at his trimmers all the time, and when they pissed him off, I mean, he was crazy. He comes pulling up through our driveway, and I don't even know who he is yet. And he jumps out of his truck, and he's like, hey, y'all need a PA system? And we're like, what? And he's like, yeah, I got that. And he pulls like this like 64-track mixer out of his truck, brings it in the house, and he's like, I got some speakers too, if y'all need speakers, monitors, and shit. And I'm like, why are you here? Like, why would, we didn't ask for anything. We didn't make any announcements. Like, there was no, then a guy comes over and drops off a guitar, which I didn't really need, but then he just died the next day, so it was ours too. Speaking of synchronicities, oh man, I missed one in the story with my mom. Let me just jump right back there real quick, because I know some of you guys have been with me the whole time. So my mom's soulmate died from huffing himself to death deliberately while drunk. So you know how they say you marry your mother? I ended up marrying a girl whose fiance drank himself to death while huffing. And my mom's soulmate was on a golf course when he did it. The girl's boyfriend was playing PGA golf video game when he did it. So, higher orders of symmetry. All right, so back to the current story. So Mountain Man drops all this stuff off, and we're like practicing all the time. I mean, it didn't make any sense either. Like, why do we suddenly have this giant farm to practice on? Where did that come from? How did that just fall out of the sky? Ivan somehow just like acquired it from this guy that even when he was there, his bedroom was literally like up against the door. Like, we were playing, sometimes like progressive, like heavy metal, big, loud, incredibly loud. 4 in the morning, and he was so drunk he would sleep right through it. So we could literally like just 7 days a week, all hours of the night and day. We had LSD for $1 a hit, so we were high all the time, practicing. So remember what the Skeleton Man said about connecting with the inner circle of the Grateful Dead, right? And how we would know within 9 months that was real. I played at a bar called Shawnee in downtown Laytonville, and one day we're leaving, and this girl stopped us, Brian and I, and she goes on this big long rant about how when people attain a certain level of consciousness and they play music, it can affect the consciousness of the people in the audience. Everyone becomes telepathically linked, and it raises them up to the level of whoever is, illuminated that's playing the music. And she described us having done that to her, and it sounded remarkably like how I would describe what the Grateful Dead did to me back in the day, right? So that girl happened to be in that bar a different night, and this guy from Jersey comes in. He's like, Jersey mob. I've never understood how this guy was such a deadhead, because the people around him were like the sleaziest people I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, I have stories that, because he would like call people on video and the things that were going on. I mean, it was just incredibly bad. But so he asked them who was the best Grateful Dead influenced guitarist in the area. And the bar owner was like, well, Harley, but I don't know how to get a hold of him. And the girl was there, and she's like, oh, I do. Let me send him a message. So she sends me a message and asked if she can give my number to this random dude in the bar. Normally, I would have said, I'm never speaking to you again. And then, because that's how it is there in California. And for some reason, I said, go ahead. So the guy invites us to play at a party in his house. And we go to the party and play. And the drummer from Rusted Root is there, which I thought was a little strange. And it kind of gave some credibility to what this guy was saying. But he's like, look, I'm going to fly Jay Lane out with... who's the other guy from Rat Dog? Whatever, the bass player from Rat Dog, which was like this band that Bob Weir had for years. Now Jay started Primus. Jay was the original drummer in Primus. And this is crazy too. It's like the universe did this for us all, because my biggest influence was the Dead, and Brian and Ivan's biggest influence was Primus. And so this guy Jay had played with both people. Primus and the Dead are who he was famous. Both of our influences is who he was famous for playing with, which was crazy, And I had been in the audience at like further concerts and stuff, and watching him play with Phil and Bobby from the Dead. And I literally thought, like, I wonder what it would be like to play with a rhythm section like that. My head would have exploded if you told me 2 years later he'd be behind me on a stage, set up next to Ivan, of all people. And so the guy says, yeah, I'm going to fly these guys out here, and they're going to come and play a show with you, and you're not just going to open for them. I want them to actually play with you guys. So we'll set up both drummers, both bass players, all these guitarists, and I was like, all right, but I don't believe you. So I go home, and, a week later or something, the phone rings. It's this guy from Jersey, and he's like, hey, can you meet me at Shaughneke's? So I go down to Shaughneke's, and he's got a lease for the building, right? And I realize this dude's not kidding. He's actually going to fly Jay, and Robin Sylvester was the other guy, the bass player, out here to play with us. And so we go and do this gig, right? And I realize, remember the Skeleton Man said, 9 months, you will know that the baby will be born, right? So it was almost 9 months to the day from when that random guy called me to when we did this show with Jay Lane, who is now playing with Dead and Company. So the prophetical fulfillment, it was all exactly correct. It all happened exactly the way that we were told it would, except that shortly after, I went to Ecuador to visit my mom, and we had an argument, and she committed suicide, and I totally lost the plot, and the rest of whatever was going to happen there just has been on pause for the last like 5 or 6 years since that occurred. And, I'm not even sure whether to say the next thing that wants to come out of my mouth, because it sounds so cold, but I think I am, because, it's like at the end of South Park, there's always some kind of moral to the story. And, with all due respect to the good parts of my mother, I would have to say that what I learned is, my brother cut her out of his life like 20 years ago or something. And I'm realizing now that, if you have someone in your life that has NPD or narcissist really badly, the only thing that you can do if you want to protect yourself is cut them out of your life. So that, yeah, I know the story just kind of crashes and burns because that's how it went. You know, right around the time of that gig, I think only a few days later, I got a call from my mom, who I hadn't spoken to in 8 years, and she was kind of implying that something was going to happen to her, and also kind of plying me with telling me that there was gold and silver buried, and she needed to show me where it was in case something happened to them. And I didn't really know what exactly that meant. So I thought, well, I should go to Ecuador probably anyways. And so I flew down here, and then when I was here, we got into a really bad argument, and then she hung herself. So I think I just kind of like spiraled out from there and never really got back on track to continue what I was doing. I don't consider the story necessarily over. You know, it's not like I'm 100 years old. Brian is still down to continue playing. And so who knows, maybe the Skeleton Man story will have a happy ending at some point. But for now, it's definitely on pause. There are a few videos, I think, on YouTube of Brian and I playing, but they're probably terrible phone recordings. And I do have the show that we played with Jay, a recording of that, in my email that I've been meaning to post for a while because it's actually decent. But yeah, that's the story of the Skeleton Man and how it just hit a fucking brick wall towards the end. The demon Karanzan. The demon Karanzan is a demon of confusion. So, yeah, I don't know why exactly that's coming to mind, but I'm not surprised. So I need about a half hour to get ready for my music stream. I appreciate each and every one of you that has spent this time with me. And one more time for the people in the back, we are demonetized, so we get nothing from YouTube. We really do appreciate support. We're down here right now working with a underserved shamana that is working with a lot of medicinal plants, and from what I understand has been very selfless in helping people to heal in terms of the dollar amounts that she's asked for compensation. And you know, we're trying to bring people to her and to preserve the information and the knowledge about the plants and also all of these mystical traditions. So if you appreciate that work, we appreciate your support in return. PayPal, Zelle, Cash App, cryptocurrency, or Patreon. We're doing a secret stream tomorrow on occult fundamentals, the number 0 and the Fool of the Tarot. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Please at least hit the like button and share, and don't forget to hit the bell notifications so you don't miss stuff, crap, junk, or things. Good night.